I'm speaking with Santanu Bhattacharya. He is the author of two books, One Small Voice and Deviants. He is an Oxford University alumni and has an engineering degree. He's also a recipient of numerous prestigious awards for his writing, including the 2023 Desmond Elliott Prize Residency, the Life Writing Prize, and a London Writers Award. Deviants, his new book, is an exploration of identity, love, resilience across three generations of gay men in India. This book comes after his critically acclaimed debut novel, One Small Voice, which was hailed as one of the Observer's best debut novels of 2023. Join us as we dive into his work, his writing process, and discuss how his experiences have shaped his story still. All right. Thank you so much, Santanu, for joining us on this episode. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Santanu, I want to first start off with a little bit about your journey. I read that you were an engineer and you went from being an engineer to a writer. So, can you tell us more about your journey and how you ended up writing two books?
I mean, I guess anyone can be a writer in that sense. You don't have to study to be a writer. You could be doing something else and be a writer. So my journey was, study engineering at that time. And then even now, I think engineering is a very popular course in India. All parents want their kids to study engineering and things like that. So I studied engineering and then I worked as an engineer for some time. And then I decided that it wasn't for me. So I changed jobs and I work in the education sector, worked with charities, with NGOs for a long time. And I still continue to work actually. So I still have a full-time job. The writing is something that almost kind of was happening in parallel. Initially it was just short stories, writing for myself and sending it to some friends and family. Um, and then I think I got more and more serious as I kept writing. And then I got the idea for a novel. And when I got that, and when I wrote the first draft of the novel end to end, that's when it got really serious. And that's when I said, I have written a novel now, no matter how unpolished, but it is a novel, and I really want to see it published in the world. And so from that point on, I got really serious about getting published.
Nice. I also read that you used to work. I mean, you are still working full time, right? You have a day job. So, like, how do you manage to write? There was an article that I came across which said like you write from like morning 4 till maybe 8 a.m.
Where are these articles?
I'll have to check, but yeah, like
No,
how do you
no,
manage?
that is absolutely true. So it's not false. I do write early in the morning. I am a morning person, so I wake up quite early. I don't need a lot of sleep in life, so I think I'm quite blessed that way. That 5 or 6 hours of solid sleep can keep me functioning for the remaining, you know, 18 hours. I write in the morning because it's silent and there are no distractions, and I can just, because silence is quite it's a big kind of condition for me to be able to write. I'm very easily distracted if there are movement around me and sounds, or trying to work and write, which is a recipe for disaster. You should never do that. So yeah, morning hours are the best for me. That's kind of when I can go into my zone, make my coffee, go into my zone, and can just be there for a couple of hours before I have to come out of it.
Yeah, but it I think must be hard managing both writing and like working full time. But being passionate about it probably changes it, right? Like you may have that impulse to like write in the morning, and maybe that creativity and self expression takes over.
I mean, it's also, I think it's evolving with every project, because the first project, I think everybody is writing around whatever life they're leading at that time. I mean, it takes a lot of privilege to say, I won't work. I don't have to pay the bills. I could just wake up in the morning and just sit down and write all day, can do whatever I want with my time. I mean, how many people have that sort of kind of luxury of time and space to do whatever they want whenever, right? So I assume that most people are writing around whatever their major preoccupations in life are, at least for the first book. And for the second book, I did take some time off. The second book actually wasn't written at 4 a.m. I did take some time off work. I took a summer off, and I had 3 months. So it was written in a lot more. That's also why it got done so quickly, because it was written in exactly the way that I would want to write my future books. Take a block of time off, immerse myself, not having to kind of yank myself in and out of creativity. And then see where it goes. So yeah, so I think that it'll evolve with every book. Maybe I will find kind of more and more about my process and try to work out conditions that'll help me perform in a certain way, because it is a lot to wake up at 4 in the morning every day, and it's a lot of work to work. I mean, by the time it's 12 noon, for example, I've been working for 8 hours, right? If I start at 4, so what's left of me, I can't expect myself to work and apply myself to anything all afternoon then. So it is a lot to ask, and I think I did it as part of kind of that first timers excitement and trying my luck and all of that. And then things happened as well. I got my agent and I got my publisher, so that kept me going, because I said, if I miss this moment, then I don't know when these opportunities are going to come back again. But I think I will have to find more sustainable ways of practicing, um, as I kind of write more books.
Right. I want to now go towards your first book before we discuss your new book, One Small Voice. So, in this, based on my research, your main character, Shubhankar, I think shares some similarities with you, both engineers, both, I think, moved to Mumbai. So, how much of yourself did you like put into this character?
Not at all, actually. And that's also something I think I do write about people and characters who are very close to me in terms of space and time, but that doesn't mean that they are me. There's a difference between, I think it's easier for me to write about cities that I have lived in, or milieux that I'm familiar with, or younger people, because, I've lived through that phase of life and things like that. But that doesn't mean that the characters themselves have anything to do with me. So therefore, what that helps with is it takes out a lot of need for research, because there's just a lot of lived experience. If I'm writing about a city I've lived in, I know the neighborhoods, I know the smells, I know the sounds, and all of that. So it becomes much easier to write about. But having said that, the characters are all their own people. When you write fiction, you allow yourself a lot of leeway in terms of creating characters and creating journeys and creating plot twists. And once you have that freedom, why do you want to restrict your characters to be like yourself or anyone you know? Then you want your imagination to go wild and for them to kind of have a whole life of their own.
That is right. I think it might be, yeah, you're right. Based on your lived experience, it's easier to create characters, but then your imagination can take over and you can build entire new worlds, characters, all of that. The book also opens with some powerful questions, I think, from a child's perspective about the Babri Masjid demolition. I think you chose to tell the story through a child's perspective. So, what led you to that decision, and why did you choose to like share it from a child's perspective, and that was such an event?
Well, I mean, so the story starts when he is kind of 3, and then we see him at 8, and then by the time the Babri Masjid demolition happens and the riots happen, he is 10. And so that part is from a child's perspective, but then we stay with him. By the time the book ends, he is in his mid 30s. So we see him through adolescence, we see him through his 20s. So we do see him through kind of different ages. But that particular incident, partially because I myself was of a very similar age when that happened, I think it was a very telling period in that it was almost kind of our induction, our generation's induction. So I'm a 90s kid. And it was our generation's induction into a lot of these things, a lot of these questions that still continue to haunt our country, right? Hindutva, secularism versus communalism, communal violence, claims over places of worship. A lot of these questions that have only gotten more strident in the last over 30 years. That was the Babri Masjid incident was an introduction for our generation into that. And that's why I wanted him also to be in that stage of his life, because that would then inform who he becomes as a person. And that would then kind of open doors in his mind and open all these questions up about what is right, what is wrong, what is moral, what is amoral, how his parents should act, how his relatives should act, where he thinks is the adults are falling short, and things like that. So I wanted him to have his own kind of moral universe at a very early age without it being impacted by any of the other adult considerations that we have. And as an adult, we're thinking about us, we're thinking about our surroundings, we're thinking about a lot of things. We're thinking about safeguarding, essentially. We're safeguarding ourselves first, ourselves and our families. But as a child, I think it's much easier to throw yourself into the thick of things without considering the realities of the world. And I wanted him to be at that stage of life where he can he can discover his moral compass in a very unfiltered way.
I think you have mentioned that recent history is more contentious and to write about and talk about than events like colonialism and partition. Do you think like writing about recent history or like the present is more difficult compared to like earlier, more difficult issues? I think that will
Absolutely.
always be the case.
Yeah, I think because there are people who still have a stake in recent history. I mean, there are people who are still around. There are people who were on both sides of that history, or of these incidents. There are people who have stories of kind of losing loved ones or are perpetrators and are trying to hide away, and so they have vested interests and they have a stake in recent history. The recent history is also very much contested by the dispensation still. So be it the government of the day. I mean, now in America, for example, we spent 4 years talking about 6th January as an insurrection. And now that Trump's back, that word is not going to be used by this current government. So essentially, it's also about who's in power, what kind of language do they want to use, what kind of incidents do they want to put forward versus what do they want to erase? How do they want to fashion the content of textbooks for what is being taught in school? What sort of narrative do they want to set? So when you are writing about recent history or medium term history, as I call it, I think there's all of these forces to contend with because there are still a lot of people out there who can stand up and say that what you're saying is wrong, or I disagree with you, or there's another side of that story, and so on. And you have to kind of you have to do a lot of work in your own head and a lot of reading and a lot of research to first agree where you stand on things, and b then how much of that do you want to put in the book, especially because it's fiction, right? And non-fiction, I feel like, can have a stronger agenda. It can make a point throughout and supply facts to make that point, whereas fiction opens up the space for many different characters to say and feel many different things. So then, as the author, I have to be very cognizant of what my characters want, what I want to say, and then find a balance between them, not be very overbearing myself, and so on. And all of that becomes a lot more difficult with medium term history. Whereas I'm not saying we've solved all the problems, or if we have 100% consensus around the world around partition or the Holocaust or slavery or colonialism and so on. But I do feel that they're lesser contested at this stage than medium term history is. So it makes it slightly, it makes it easier to take a stand on, or like have a stance on any of those things that are kind of over 75 years old now.
And how do you approach writing about traumatic scenes? I think in the book there is something that happens, and there's some traumatic scenes as well as moments of joy as well. So how do you, go about writing those scenes? Is it through memory, through imagination, through like how would you go about writing that?
I mean, it's all of that. Some of it is, even if you haven't lived that exact experience, to be able to write something, you have to get into the skin of your character, and then to do that you have to access something similar in your own life. So whether it's joy or trauma or something horrible happening, something nice happening, I try to find something similar, not in terms of the incident per se, but in terms of how it would make me feel. So if I'm writing something that is a very difficult experience, I think back to the difficult experience that I might have had and how that made me feel, and try to channel those emotions into what the character is feeling. But I also think, like I said, that once you create a character, and especially in fiction, the character also, after a certain point, leaps off the page and becomes a person of their own. And the most time you spend with them, the more drafts you are doing, it becomes easier to write their emotions and to know what they are feeling. And there could come a point when they're feeling quite differently to how you felt, and at that point, you know that your character is free of you, and your character can kind of just live on the page by themselves without you having to bring in any of your past experiences or understanding or emotions.
And again, based on my research, I found out that you had put this manuscript away for 5 years. Is that right? And then did you like come back to it, publish it? Like, how come you kept it away for so long, and what made you like come back to it?
Well, I kept it away because I was just very unimpressed by what I had written. I remember I kind of wrote 24,000 words, and then I sat and read it. I sent it to friends, and I was so unimpressed myself because I guess like I read a lot, and my sense of quality is quite high because when you read a lot of books and you read a lot of really good authors, you know what good writing looks like. And when you are ready to write a book of your own, you want to write something of that quality. At least me, like I didn't want to, and I was in no hurry because I mean, this was always a passion project. And I said, maybe right now I'm not ready to tell the story. Maybe right now I don't have the tools or the language. And honestly, I don't also have the time at this point. So I put it away. And then when I found myself with a little more time, I kind of dusted off the manuscript, started writing all over again, gave it a very different kind of storyline and ethos and so on. And then, yeah, that's when it got real.
So now I want to shift gears to your like second most recent book that is releasing in Feb 2025. So can you share more about the book and what is it about?
Yeah. So it's called Deviants, and Deviants is the story of three generations of gay men in India, and it looks at each generation's fight against the currents of their times for love, for dignity, for equal rights, for visibility, and so on, and how each generation's journey into finding their queerness and expressing themselves has been quite different. So the oldest character is from the 1970s, the youngest character is in the present day, and so it does look at the shifting attitudes towards homosexuality in Indian society and the Indian legal landscape as well. But that doesn't mean that the generation today does not have issues to deal with, and we've solved all the problems. So it does kind of take this intergenerational view of homosexuality and kind of look at what each generation's experience has been.
So what led you to this structure of having three generations using three distinct voices? How did you think about the idea and come up with this structure of having three separate generations and viewpoints?
I guess, I mean, the starting point for this novel was wanting to tell the story of my generation because, growing up gay in India, I think my generation is kind of at that unique kind of intersection. People before us were just very silent about their sexuality. People after us have, people who are young now feel a lot more comfortable being out and proud and have their kind of, forums and their communities to access. I guess in my generation, some of it was there. We knew some of it, but there was also a lot that wasn't there. Growing up in the 90s, pre-internet, but also during, with the advent of the internet and Section 377 almost coming back with full force, and you see all these reports in on the TV or in newspapers, and all these people getting arrested and being thrown into prison, and so you're growing up with a very strong awareness of the whole kind of state machinery working against you. You already know that the social structure and the social fabric is working against you. But there's also kind of the state machinery that's working against you. The legal machinery is working against you. So I always wanted to tell that story of kind of growing up in that very tense time of trying to find try to find your community and your voice through all of that noise. But then I wanted to extend that narrative also, and wanted to think about the men who came before us, what their experience was, and then what it is like today. I thought it would be quite an interesting experiment because you usually think of uh, kind of your case stories are usually individual stories. There is one character and there is kind of their arc from start to finish. Now, so it would be a nice experiment to do it for three men instead of one, and then put them in three different generations, but also have them related. So they're actually all part of the same family. So they're uncle nephew, and I wanted to kind of really explore what that meant to have somebody in your family for the different generations, to know that there is somebody, and sometimes you can talk to them, sometimes you can't, and there's this shroud of silence. So I wanted to kind of play around with all these concepts, and then this story kind of gave me that opportunity to explore all of these things.
Yeah. And I think it's unique, and because every generation will have a different viewpoint, and it'll be a different history for them. So it gives them a lot more different choices and how what they see. So I think while doing your research, you had also spoken to like people of the previous generation as well, and you got different perspectives. So was there anything that surprised you in these conversations that you had while doing research for this book?
I mean, as with any kind of generation, there's a whole diversity of views in every generation. So not everybody feels the same way. So there are people I spoke to who were activists, who continue to be activists, and who we are very grateful to for even kind of bringing this LGBTQ activism and the ask for equal rights to the fore, at a time when we were kids, because we benefit from the work that they did. And then there was some who, this was slightly older, like people in their late 60s, early 70s, who probably feel like it was easier in their times because they could stay hidden away, and they could just kind of focus on having fun. Whereas now it's just, it feels like a battlefield. Everyone's out there, and you're having to kind of defend your rights and ask for equal rights, and jump at everything that is wrong. And they said our times were easier. We were behind doors, we had our cruising spots, and we just went and we had fun. And we miss those times. And also, like, they're just completely against the apps. They can't get their heads around how people can connect over apps, and the level of communication is so dismal, and which I completely agree with. The level of communication in the apps is so dismal that they just don't think of this as kind of any sort of building any sort of human connection, which they feel like back in the day they could. You could walk into a club, a gay club, and walk out making a friend who will then end up being a lifelong friend or something, which can't happen on an app. You can't log into an app and make a lifelong friend. So so yeah, there was quite a diversity of views, and it was very interesting. Some of it I saw where it was coming from, some of it I agreed with, some of it I disagreed with. But yeah, there was an interesting exercise.
Sounds interesting as well. Was there a different writing process you followed for your second book compared to your first book? I know you mentioned you took some time off, but was there anything different in the second book?
Well, not so much process wise, in the sense that because my first book is kind of, it's a single story with a lot of, One Small Voice is one of those very, I would say, very kind of conventional novels where there is a single storyline with a protagonist, but then there are subplots. There is a whole cast of characters. The writing of it needed to be quite different. I needed to be very aware of all the characters that I was creating, ask myself whether I needed all of them. If I did create a character, I couldn't just forget about them. I had to give everyone an arc. So in that sense, I feel like One Small Voice was a lot more, uh, how do I put it? It was a grander project, and I had to take a lot of characters and a lot of plots and a lot of people with me, from start to finish. This one was a lot more surgical. This one was three stories, and I wanted to stay very focused on these three men. I didn't want subplots. I didn't want, pages of description on anything else. My whole point was I'm writing a story about three men who don't get enough spotlight in the world. And therefore, my only job here is to shine a spotlight on them, and everything else, everyone else's story, all the other characters, all the whatever, the places, the weather descriptions, everything can go out the window. It's just these three men that I need to focus on. So they were very, each was difficult in its own way. They were very different as well. It wasn't the same process in that sense. because while One Small Voice, like I said, is quite expansive and descriptive, this one is a lot more just kind of forensic in that sense. But it was fun to do something very different. And I think, as a creative person, that's also something that we crave, to do things differently. I mean, if I write my first, second, third, fourth, fifth book all in exactly the same way, following the exact same mindset, having the exact same process, I don't challenge myself in any way, I don't try to do anything new, it would get quite boring and I'd actually lose interest in writing altogether. So I think it's good to keep yourself on your toes and try to do new things and challenge yourself, work differently with every book.
So that's interesting. How do you handle like sensitive topics um, in your stories? We had briefly touched about it earlier on political aspects. So like how do you handle these sensitive topics and how do you incorporate it into your book? How do you address politics in these stories?
Is it just politics? Because sensitive topics can be kind of beyond politics as well. But I think in general, with sensitive topics and with politics, I mean, the best way is to be led by the story and the characters. And like I said, because I write fiction, anything that I put on the page has to mean something to the character. In non-fiction, there's a lot of the author in the book, because the author is making a point, the author is presenting facts, the author is making arguments. Whereas in fiction, actually, the more the author can keep themselves away from the story and let the characters lead the story, the better story it makes. And so I, even with sensitive subjects, I kind of really query my characters, where they stand on these, how they are impacted, what does a particular incident, kind of what impact does it have on the character, but also what impact does it have on the plot line and so on. So I kind of try to make it as much part of the narrative as possible. Because what I don't like doing also is symbolic mentions. So if I'm writing about the Babri Masjid demolition, I should make it real for the character and therefore for the reader. It can't be that my story is about something else, and then I just happen to mention that, oh, by the way, this happened, which is, I don't like doing that at all. And I see too many writers do that because they are either very careful, or they don't know how to incorporate something big into the story. For me, if I can't incorporate something big into the story, I'll just leave it out. I won't even mention it, because if I am mentioning something, it has to have some relevance. So that's also something that I do with, sensitive topics, if you will, where anything that I mention is an integral part of my story, and my characters are directly impacted and my storyline is directly impacted by it. It isn't just kind of a gratuitous mention of some incident in the newspaper and then I forget about
What do you think about the present LGBTQ community in India and its movement? Do you think it will get more acceptance, a more favorable perception, or do you think it'll be hard? I know it's slightly off topic, but related as well to your book on the LGBT community. So, what do you think about the present situation and the future?
I mean, I am very optimistic in the sense that I feel like there is a vibrant community now, and there is vibrant community, but it is also very visible, because of social media, because of organizations, because of Pride Parade. I think the decriminalization of homosexuality in 2018 has really kind of removed the legal threat to the community, and at least we're not going to be put in jail. And therefore, the queer space has opened up in ways that were previously unimaginable. I think there are key questions now. So I think anybody who wants to co-opt themselves into the LGBTQ community is able to do that. But I think there are also so many people who are not able to, because because of their situations, because of their circumstances, their families, or where they live. Maybe where they live, they don't really have that much of a community. And I think the question now is, now that we've created these communities and there is all this visibility, how do we expand this? How do we make it more inclusive? How do we create opportunities for more people to come be part of it in a way that makes sense to them, in a way that they feel safe and secure? So I think that's the big question. The other thing is, I mean, this is for the LGBT community itself, But for the non-LGBTQ people in general, I just feel like you could go through life in most of the world and definitely in India. As a straight person, you can go through life without engaging with anything LGBTQ at all. Might you might spend years not having to think about anything related to LGBTQ. It's almost like, yeah, there are all these people, they live on a different planet. I don't need to, you know, don't need to concern myself with them. I am here, they are there. And I think that needs to change. That needs to, that there need to be people, we need to be more relevant to people's lives, our choices, our partners. We need to be able to walk into a workplace and talk about our personal lives with the same ease and freedom that a straight person walks in and talks about their husband or their wife or their children or their dog. And, you know, that level of comfort where we are not having to hide ourselves away from public life in any way is very important and is a key marker of equality in society. So for me, that is kind of where we need to get to, that we need to achieve.
There are some critics, I think, especially in the West, who sort of argue that in some situations and circles, being part of this community may get you an advantage. Like if you identify a certain way, there may be more chances given compared to, say, another person. So, do you think this is true?
This is definitely not happening in India. I don't think it's happening anywhere. I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll have to talk about specifics if we want to get into the actual argument of who these people are, what they're talking about, what their examples are, where have they seen this happen. I mean, as a gay person myself, I can tell you that I haven't been able to just walk in and get things easily. If anything, the struggle is harder, a lot harder. So yeah, I don't even want to respond to this. I think at the end of the day, no one's gonna give anyone an opportunity unless it makes sense. In the business world, if you're talking about in the business world, in the political realm, I mean, no one's gonna have, at the end of the day, no one's gonna hire an incompetent person to do a job. So you're not getting a job because you are of a certain denomination or you're of a certain ethnicity or you identify with a certain sexuality. You're getting a job because you passed interviews and you took tests and you studied certain things and you are good at that job and you have proven it. Um, Similarly for anyone in public office, similarly for, anyone trying to do anything. The world is a very transactional, ruthless place, and no one's gonna feed you for free. One's lunches, it's the basics of economics. Everyone has to pay for their lunch. So whether you're straight or gay, man or woman, yeah, you have to be competent. And I guess a lot of people who say these things are now coming to terms and waking up to the fact that there are a lot of competent people in sections that they previously didn't see at all. So they see all these minority groups and they think, wow, like, LGBTQ people can do these jobs as well. Oh, wow, gay people can be doctors, gay people can be astronauts, women can be astronauts, ethnic minorities can, I don't know, can do all these jobs. And they are these things that they say are kind of a response to their insecurities and a response to them, learning almost that they are not the only ones, the straight men of the world. They are not the only ones who can do these jobs because traditionally they had the power base and they kept these jobs for themselves and excluded everyone. And now with the world opening up, they're having to kind of reckon with limits of their own competence and their own abilities. So good luck to them, I guess. I mean, yeah, that's my only response to something like this.
I believe you have mentioned that you were influenced by Bollywood. So, like, is that true? Were you influenced by Bollywood, and does like cinema influence your writing as well?
In a big way, I really love watching movies, and I grew up watching all kinds of films, but also a lot of Bollywood. I think there is something about kind of the bridge that Bollywood movies are able to create between, the story, the actors, and the audience. There's a reason why they are so popular. There's a reason why, they stand the test of time. There's a reason why we can still sit and watch movies from the 60s and the 70s, and I am very interested in as an artist myself. I'm very interested in that sort of craft, and what creates that stickiness with your audience, and how do I tell stories that can engage the reader, that can keep the keep bringing back the reader to my work, that the reader will remember moments and things, and moments and emotions and characters from the book for hopefully many years. So very interested in that sort of kind of creating that lasting, sticky, entertaining, engaging experience that I feel like Bollywood movies do so well. um you might think they're not great cinema, but you can't deny the fact that they are unbelievably popular. And not just in India, but kind of all the way from China, Japan, Southeast Asia, the African continent, Eastern Europe. I mean, honestly, very. I think it's just the Anglophone world, or like Western Europe and America, that have very little exposure of Bollywood. Pretty much everyone else in every other part of the world loves and watches Bollywood. And I think there's something to be said for that. And as a storyteller, I'm very interested in how it's done. And so I try to take my lessons when I can. If I'm impressed by something, then I try to learn from it.
And have you figured out the magic formula of how Bollywood tells stories?
I think there's a strong resonance with. I mean, having said this, not every film is great, right? But if you look at the good ones, I do think that there's a strong resonance with character. Every movie, every good film, Bollywood, Hollywood, any from anywhere else in the world, I think what it does is create a strong resonance with your main character, and you're rooting for them. You see some of yourself in them. You want them to do well, and I think that is really key. That is one thing that I kind of my characters, I try to make them strong enough, whether they are flawed, they are sometimes they're doing unlikable things, but whatever it is, I feel like the reader should feel a strong resonance with this character, should want to be with this character. That's kind of at the very basic of storytelling. So I hate flat characterization. I like characters who are quite dynamic and real in that sense, even if they're doing the wrong things sometimes. And the other is, I think the storytelling itself, needs to be quite dynamic. So the fact that you can have, this huge canvas in Bollywood, you can have these big moments, big dialogues, dances, songs. I feel like the audience needs to feel a bit kind of larger than life. And then, in storytelling as well, if we can create these moments where the audience feels, the reader feels connected to something larger than just the character or just their lives, then it gives them that kind of larger than life experience, which can only be a good thing.
Do you have any favorites?
In terms of movies,
Yeah, any Bollywood, like your all-time favorite Bollywood movie, maybe.
oh god, I mean there are so many. I mean, I wouldn't call him Bollywood, but I really like the cinema of Shyam Benegal. He just recently passed away. uh, I'm a huge fan of Shyam Benegal's work. I also think that, I mean, Yash Chopra, not every film of his is great, but I think there is something to be said about the the prolificness of his work, and how he made films in the 1960s, and he was making films all the way into the 2010s, and how young they all were. The movies were so young, and he was aging, but his storytelling wasn't, and he was keeping up with the times, and not just in terms of the stories, but also in terms of the art, the costumes, the dialogue, all of that as well, how he presented his actors and things like that. So I think like I get a lot of kind of inspiration from people who have these long bodies of work, and how they've managed to keep themselves young and relevant even though up and on with the times. It's very inspiring to think of them, and to think that one day, if I'm writing my 10th book, I am not some kind of old jaded person. I still have that light in me and that youth in me to be able to tell that story.
And speaking of influences, I believe you're from Kolkata. So has your hometown influenced your writing as well?
I think subliminally, I haven't spent a lot of time in Kolkata.
Yep.
My childhood was in Bangalore, spent time as an adult in Mumbai. But But so I don't think that, as a kind of, I'm not actively um, inspired by Kolkata in that sense because I also left so long ago. But I think subliminally, it is such a, it is a city that respects art and writing so much. There's so much respect for, you have more respect as a school teacher, even today in Kolkata, you have more respect as a school teacher than as a business person, and that just says something about society and where they put their value. you know. So you could have a lot of money, but actually, it's the poor school teacher who will have a lot more respect in society. And I think so. Some of these values, I think, are have kind of seeped into me, and my respect for the arts, my respect for writing, for reading, for cinema, for music. A lot of this comes from my family and from that very kind of, Bengali milieu, Kolkata, and things like that. So I do give it credit. I mean, when I say I have no influences, that would be wrong. I don't actively take inspiration from the city, but I think there's a lot of it that is already in me because I'm a product of that city. My whole family is there. My parents are from there. So it can't be that I have nothing of that city in me.
A few quick fire rapid questions
God.
for you. Who's your favorite author?
No, I can't do this.
No.
There is not one person, and there are. I think that the older I'm getting and the more I'm reading, there are favorite books, but there isn't a favorite author because you read more authors and you read many books by the same author and you realize that some books are great, some books are okay-ish, some books are really not that good. So I'm not starry-eyed about any one author right now in my life. I'm not like, oh my god, that person.
What's the best writing advice you've received?
Just completely shut out the world and not think about your kind of reader at all, which is what I do, which I try doing. Just not think about any one person reading the book. Just kind of write it for yourself.
Is that the same advice you'll give to writers as well, or would
Of
you want to
course.
change that?
Because the moment you start thinking about readers, you have all these other voices that are coming in, and then you're contaminating your thought process. A lot of these readers you're thinking about because you can't think of unknown readers, so you think about people you know. And then when the book comes out, you realize that a lot of people you thought about didn't even read the book. So why spend time thinking about them in the first place? So yeah, definitely not. Don't think about readers.
Which book that you've read do you wish you had written yourself?
There are quite a few of these. So I'm a big fan of some books. Ruskin Bond, for example, is such a great writer. And I would love to write something of kind of, his simplicity and honesty, the way with which he approaches his storytelling, the kinds of stories he tells. So I'm a huge fan of Ruskin Bond. There's this one book, there are quite a few, but there's a set of four books by Elena Ferrante called My Brilliant Friend, and then My Brilliant Friend is the first of the quartet, and then there are three other books. Um, and I love those books so much, and I was very jealous when I read it, and I thought, I should have written these.
No. Yeah,
I
it's
wish I wish I could.
yeah, and I've just got it myself. I'm yet to start the book, but I believe the author is mysterious. I believe she has like yeah,
Yeah,
she's a
she's
right.
anonymous. Nobody knows who
Yeah,
she is.
yeah. That's interesting. And is there anything else like writing which is creative that you like spend your time on? Do you like paint or do something other than writing that is creative?
Yeah, no, I do a lot of. I'm quite a creative person, even though obviously writing of all my creative endeavors, writing takes the most time. Also because now I'm published and all that. So I sketch, I paint, I sing. I was learning to play the piano, which is now paused. So I try to keep myself as creatively engaged as possible, but not as much as I would like.
What are you working on next?
Nothing as of now. I mean, this second book just came out. So I've been I've been promoting this book, and I just came back from India actually on a multi-week kind of tour. And there's a lot of activity here as well in the UK. And I have some ideas, and I think the question is, how do I create the time for it? Because, like I said, for me, time is a big question. And lack of time is kind of the biggest challenge for me to write. So I have to first block some time out and then see what interests me the most. But what I also want to start doing is translating from Bengali, because I find there's a lot of really interesting work happening in that language. And I feel like we have translated some of the greats, such as, Rabindranath Tagore and so on. But like, who are the new, fresh voices in Bengali, for example? Like, who's writing now? What are they writing about? And I do want to kind of create more of a forum for them and bring their voices to a more global readership. So I actually started some practice sample translations last year, and I want to do more of those this year, and then see kind of where it goes.
Excellent. One final question. How can readers connect with you, find your book? Where should they reach out?
Well, my books are all available. Uh, ideally everywhere. So check your local bookshop, order from there if it's not in stock. One Small Voice is my first one. Deviants is my second. I also am on social media. So I'm on Twitter, X, and on Instagram. So it's SANTANU_BX is my handle. So find me, and then all the links are there, so you can find the books, you can order. There are also kind of short pieces of mine that got published, short stories and so on. So you can kind of go and read some of the short stories that are publicly available.
I'll also add that in the description below. Thank you so much, Santanu, for joining and sharing your insights on writing, on your books. It was a real pleasure speaking with you.
Now, thanks a lot for the time and for creating this platform for me. Thank you.